So welcome. Thank you for coming today. This is our third annual Workforce Conference. It's great to see that so many of you have been able to attend today. It's all a bit different this time round as it's being held online rather than in our offices at London Bridge. The positive side to that is that some of our clients and contacts who are further away in the UK or based internationally have been able to attend today, which is great. It's great to see some new faces. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Louise Lawrence and I'm a partner in the employment team at Winkle Sherwood. We have a large team of 13 employment lawyers, some of them whom will be speaking today, and I hope you'll also get to meet some of them during the networking session today. So we have a wealth of experience in advising a wide range of organisations on all aspects of their employment law needs. So from drafting contracts of employment and policies and procedures to advising on grievance and disciplinary issues, as well as redundancies and restructures, and also acting in employment tribunal claims. So our firm, Winkle Sherwood, is a full service law firm. So we offer a whole range of legal services to our clients, including tax, immigration, property, commercial. So if you do have legal advice that you need outside of employment law, then please do let us know and we can put you in touch with one of our colleagues. So the conference today is focused around a key theme, the key themes of leadership skills, building resilience and a thriving culture, and business strategy. It's been a really challenging time for businesses during the pandemic. Many businesses have had to make tough decisions, including asking employees to take pay cuts or possibly making redundancies. For employees as well, it's been a very uncertain time, with many employees feeling that there's been a negative impact on their well-being, and some have found it difficult working from home. So with the new working arrangements, we're feeling quite isolated. And HR professionals have been playing a pivotal role in navigating the challenges that the pandemic has brought. And our conference today is really about taking stock and looking forward to how businesses can have an engaged, thriving and inclusive workforce during these difficult times, and how leaders need to think about strategy, build resilience at work and build an ethical leadership. And we have a and I'm really excited to hear from them. So our mid-morning session will be a networking session. So we'll be having a break at that point, and we'll be allocating people on a random basis into small groups so you can network with your peers and share your experiences. I hope you enjoy the treat that we've sent you for the networking sessions. If you provided your details to receive those, I'm looking forward to digging into mine during the networking break. This afternoon we have 4 interactive breakout sessions which will be hosted by our employment team. You've been able to choose 2 out of the 4 sessions. The sessions will be looking at the employment law issues in relation to disability discrimination, settlement agreements and workplace investigations. We'll also be doing a roundup of the key cases in the past 12 months and forthcoming changes to expect. If you haven't decided which workshop you would like to attend yet, then there's further details in the agenda of these sessions, so hopefully that will help you decide. At the end of the day, our employment team is holding one-to-one sessions where you can ask about the employment law issues that your business is currently facing. These sessions did have to be pre-booked, so if you did book one of those, you would have received the details for those separately. You all should hopefully have received a copy of the agenda, which sets out the detailed timings for the day. We also have our Workforce Conference Hub, which will hold the recordings of the sessions, materials and the slides. And we'll be reminding you of the link for the hub throughout today, so you can access that. Throughout the conference this morning, your videos and microphones will be turned off, but you will have the opportunity to ask questions to the speakers and take part in polls. and all of the morning sessions will be recorded. These afternoon sessions on workplace investigations, discrimination and settlement agreements will be interactive, where you'll be encouraged to have your cameras and microphones on, and we won't be recording those sessions, so to encourage as much participation as possible, and hopefully you'll feel comfortable in sharing your experiences and views. We will be sending you a feedback form after the conference today, and it'd be fantastic if you could fill that in, as we really do appreciate your feedback on our events. And it would also be great if you could let us know which topics you would like to hear about, as we're currently putting in place our programme of events for HR professionals for next year. So it would be great to have your feedback so we can incorporate that feedback when we're putting together that programme. Our final HR hour session for this year is being held on the 25th of November at 10 AM, and it's on Brexit and the new immigration rules. How will this affect you and your business? And we hope you'll be able to join us for this event. So if you have any technical queries today, then please put them in the chat box. I think that's the best way of dealing with it, and then one of our team will help you. So that's the housekeeping bit over. So we have got first up today our panel session on culture and strategy. So I'm just going to invite our panelists to please join the session now. Great. So thank you. So yes, so our panel session today will be on culture and strategy, and I'm delighted that we have Natasha Wallace, Julia Hayhoe and Sarah Bolas joining us to share their views. So just by way of intros, Natasha is founder and chief coach of Conscious Works, which is a consulting company specialising in workplace wellbeing. Natasha also chairs the Engage for Success Wellbeing Thought and Action Group, where she's currently researching the key traits of conscious leaders. She's also the author of The Conscious Effect, 50 Lessons for Better Organisational Wellbeing, and she sits on the advisory board for BT Digital. Julia is Managing Director of Hayhoe Consulting, which is focused on the professional services and the legal sector, enabling clients to achieve strategic, sustainable growth by adapting to changing market dynamics. And prior to founding Hayhoe Consulting, Julia was Chief Strategy Officer at Baker & McKenzie. She also holds a number of NED and advisory roles, including Strategy Officer at the World Economic Forum. Sarah is Head of Behavioural Change at MCM Architecture and oversees all of their behavioural change projects. Recently, she's helped Iberian Group for transitioning to their new headquarters, and is also leading a progressive change project for one of the top UK retailers. So thank you to our panellists for joining us today. So during the session today, please do ask any questions to the panellists via the Q&A box, which you can see at the bottom of your screen. So please just put them in the box throughout the session. And then I'll be asking questions to the panellists from those probably around midway through, and then also at the end of the session. So the COVID-19 pandemic has had a huge impact on ways of working, with more employees than ever undertaking flexible working. So that could be working from home or working flexible hours. And many employers and employees have reported positively to these changes. But there have also been some challenges with home working. We carried out some research back in the summer, and businesses reported that the top challenges that they faced were engaging with employees who were working remotely, that there was less collaboration and cross-referrals of business between employees, and that they were concerned about the negative impact on employee well-being. So this new way of working has meant that businesses have had to think about how to build their workplace culture and how to foster that with this new way of working. So we thought, just to kickstart our panel discussion today, that we would do a poll. So we're just going to put that up now, so hopefully you can all see that. So the question is, as a business, we are comprehensively addressing how to build a thriving workplace culture in a hybrid environment. So that's where you'd have some employees working from home and some employees in the office. And the answers are: 1, that you strongly agree, 2, you somewhat agree, 3, you somewhat disagree, or 4, you strongly disagree. So if you could just complete your answer. And I think now, hopefully, some of you have had an opportunity. So we're just putting up the answer here. So we've got the top answer being that you somewhat agree, and also a strong answer for strongly agree. So it's great to see that so many businesses are thinking about how to build their workplace culture currently. So that's, I think, really positive. So Natasha, I'm going to come to you first. So what are your thoughts on how to build a thriving workplace culture when we've got, some employees working from home, some perhaps in the office, which is, probably likely to continue as the norm for many of us, particularly having more home working. So what are your thoughts on how to build a thriving workforce culture?
Thank you, Louise. So, I think that those results are interesting, but I guess not a surprise, because there aren't many organisations who haven't felt the impact of what we've been going through, and change has been a necessary consequence of it. I think one of the things that I have seen has really helped organisations get through this is being very, very clear around what the purpose is. Not just at an organisational level, I think that's important, but also at a team and individual level. So we've had to get very, very clear about what it is we're trying to achieve. For some organisations, that's remained the same, and it's just needed some reinforcement. But for other organisations, they've had to pivot. They've had to refocus their efforts. They've had to understand how to respond to the customer or the client. And so it's really required some sort of firming up of what the vision is, not just to ensure that everybody understands what is important, but also so everybody understands what they're actually doing. And I think, unfortunately, in times like this, stress is created by a loss of control, uncertainty, a lack of information. So the more that we can do organisationally to try and plug the gaps on that as much as possible, and it's not possible to plug all of the gaps, the easier it is for people to get on and do their work. And I'll talk a little bit about this later on. But being able to perform in your job, being able to do good work and to be empowered to do good work is one of the most important aspects of well-being and building resilience. So organisationally, being very, very clear about the vision, being very clear about what matters at the moment, and also then enabling that at an individual level. So what does that actually mean for you in terms of what you have to do? That's fundamental. But I think the other thing is about connection. So there's been a recent piece of research done into what leads to trust in teams, but they looked at it in virtual in comparison to face-to-face. And what they found is nothing changes. So we need to have trust within our teams and organisations in order for performance to thrive. We know that. And in a virtual world, it is no different, other than we've got to be more intentional about it. And I think that we're having to be so much more intentional about that connection. So having regular conversations, but making time for them, putting them into the diary, being really mindful as a manager or a leader who you've connected to and whether you're staying connected to everybody in your team. But also recognising that all those incidental conversations have gone from around the workplace if you're working remotely. So how do you create incidental conversations? How do you create the opportunity to bond and share and have fun and, you know, have informal, casual conversations, which is where the real sort of heart of organizations tends to sit. So understanding how to create that connection at a manager to employee level, at a team level, and also at an organizational level is really going to be important for HR teams, for leaders to be thinking about moving forward.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, did you want to add anything, Sarah, on this, on the culture point?
Yeah, just completely agree. I think, you know, for the last decade or so, buildings and workspaces have been deliberately designed to try and create some of those water cooler moments, to get those connections, to have the conversations, to get one department to deliberately bump into another department in the hope that you know, referrals will happen, all of those kinds of things. So I think it's just, how do you replicate that when the container of the office is perhaps not available to everybody right now? And certainly, you know, we're seeing in the projects we're working on at the moment, what pleases me actually is kind of the importance put on culture and social connection and all of those things, which perhaps people talked to a little bit before, but might not always have been at the forefront of people's minds. And I think people are really seeing now it's such an essential part of any business. For performance, for those hard outcomes, you actually need this kind of stuff. So it's actually really nice that it's part of the conversation now, I think.
Yeah, I know. I mean, we are seeing that, you know, some businesses are already thinking about their offices. You know, some have taken the step of, you know, closing their office already and having permanent home working. Some are thinking about having reduced office space or moving to perhaps using co-working shared spaces. So what's been your experience, and what do you think is the purpose of the office moving forward? You know, if people are keeping their office space or they're thinking about repurposing it, what is the purpose of the office in the new world of work?
Yeah, and I think that question is great, right? I think no one's been thinking about that necessarily until now, going, actually, when we really kind of drill down to it, what do we need this building and this kind of space before? I mean, what we're kind of witnessing at the moment is really the acceleration of trends that were already in the workplace. You know, as HR professionals, you'd have been thinking about employee engagement and attraction and retention of talent and the desire for more flexibility. Lots of organizations were already trying to go agile or have activity-based working. But what COVID has done is it's almost the proof of concept, right? Because there was a lot of hesitation. You know, what would have taken a change program of 6 to 18 months have happened in weeks. And, you know, a lot of organizations went, oh, you know, this does work, actually. It's a surprise. So it means that we're now able to have those other conversations, which is, okay, well, if this works well enough, what does this mean for our business and what's the opportunity? We're seeing some organizations reduce the footprint of their office by up to a half to 2/3 in some instances. You know, my advice is to be cautious before you make that decision and do the groundwork to make sure that the decision is right for your business. And I think that's what's really important, is every business is really different, and designing the future office requires you to understand, well, what would we want people to come into the office for? And as Natasha exactly said, you know, it is social cohesion, it is connection, it is collaboration, it is doing the tasks that are best done in an office. But what we're seeing is really interesting about that is how it's shaping people's working weeks. So for a lot of people, it will be, I will come into the office a few days a week to do certain things, and then I will do other sorts of things at home where it suits me better to do that. Another point to make perhaps is that there is a generational difference showing up in the data. You know, it's same storm, different boats, right? It's lovely if you've got a lovely house and your home office and a garden, and you know, it's helping your life be easier to work from home, then that's wonderful. If you're in a shared house with crappy broadband, perhaps not, and actually you're, you know, desperate to get back into the office. So it's also about designing a way of work and a workspace that meets the needs, that varying group of needs. So really, really exciting times. And you know, I think for us, we've been trying to get HR into the room to have property conversations for a very long time. So what's really nice about this is actually everyone's starting to speak the same language, really, with people at the heart. What does this kind of look like?
Yeah, and we found that from our research in the summer as well, actually, that there was this generational difference as to how challenging people found home working. So yeah, it is, I think, as you said, looking at really what the needs of your workforce are when you're thinking about, you know, your office space and the design of it and what the purpose is.
Yeah, you need to do the deep dive, and once you've got, and what's great is, again, the level of awareness for people's own personal productivity. You get to have the great conversation of these kinds of workspaces really suit me. Do you know what? I never liked the open plan office. It didn't suit my personality, or it didn't suit my preference, or it didn't suit my the tasks that I had to do. So actually, for me personally, I'd rather be operating in these spaces. So I think what we're seeing right now is offices looking and feeling very different. They're going to become attractors. They'll be wanting to pull people in, and actually the types of spaces you need probably not going to be rows and rows of desks where everyone sits individually looking at their emails but happens to be sitting next to each other. But there'll be spaces that are more about collaboration, creativity, conversation. So the trends are really interesting.
Thank you.
Louise, I might just offer up some
Yes,
questions
please
on
do.
this. It's such a fundamentally interesting topic, the intersection of culture in the office. And what I've been working with businesses on is on 3 key leadership questions that I think can really help leaders get to what culture means in this new norm. And I think it's a time to really challenge assumptions. The first question is, an open question around what do your people want and need from the workforce, from the workplace? You mentioned that there's some big challenges. I think you called out engagement, collaboration, well-being. So the second one is, what are the rules of engagement around how we achieve collaboration, well-being? And the third one is the pitfalls. You were just calling out, Sarah, some of the demographic issues. We know a number of cultural issues. We know a number of social issues. So we've got to be really mindful about some of the pitfalls to guard against. And when we've seen a lot of data throughout the pandemic on inclusion and diversity and the caring role, potentially disproportionately falling to women, and also the challenges of minorities getting their voice heard. So I think those 3 questions, what do people want and need? What are your new rules of engagement, and what are the pitfalls, can help you get to some real tangible aspects of culture.
Yeah, and I think that probably comes back to the point Natasha was saying as well about is having those on the engagement point. It's having those intentional, those regular conversations and the informal ones. It's not just about work, calling someone up to have the conversation about work. It's also finding the time to have those, the social chats, not as well, just beyond just your team, but in, for other departments as well. So I think we're going to do our next poll now, which is a focus more on business strategy. So we'll just put that up now. So the question is, to what extent as a business are you purpose driven? So here it's, having a purpose which goes beyond just looking at profit for shareholders. And the answers are, 1, our purpose is part of our strategy and clearly articulated and understood. 2, our purpose is part of our strategy, though not clearly articulated and understood. 3, our purpose is currently being revisited or refreshed. And 4, our purpose is not part of our strategy, nor clearly articulated and understood. So if you could just choose one of those 4 answers. Just give it a little bit longer. Give you a chance to answer. So if we could bring the results up. Great, so very positive that majority of people that have answered have said that the purpose is part of our strategy and clearly articulated and understood, which is great. So I think, Julia, I wonder what your thoughts are about that, because I mean, I think from a leadership and strategy perspective, it's probably now is a good time, you would say, probably to revisit your strategy, even if you've got a clear strategy, and to think about how you can pave your way through the pandemic.
Yes, absolutely. And I think we've all touched on purpose in this conversation. And I think, you know, my mantra to everybody is that purpose really is the new norm, and it just gets us through this storm. It's a strong mantra. And why do I say that? It is a top boardroom topic. This question just alluded to it. What is the purpose of business and society now? And so this is on the boardroom agenda. And the shift away from a shorter term, more shareholder focus to what's being coined as stakeholder capitalism, that longer term value creation, sort of with and for your broader stakeholders in the round. So businesses are really having to have a point of view on this, and you can see this whichever sector you're in. If you look at the energy sector, you've got BP who have just come out with a fundamentally new purpose that is leaning much more into green and renewables, and that has fundamental impact for their operations, where they invest, where they divest. You see it through the retail sector, and you also see all of the brand and the customer engagement issues, if you look at Boohoo, for example. So it really is a key boardroom topic, and that point of view as to where you sit on the purpose of business and society and the short-term, long-term financial broader metrics is really key. So that's why I'm not surprised. I think we've got almost 25% of businesses revisiting purpose and strategy. So I'm not surprised by that. I think Natasha or Sarah called out some of the big mega trends. So we're right in this pandemic, which is absolutely horrific, but strategically as a business, it's important to look behind and underneath the pandemic. And there are these 4 mega trends that are impacting business, culture, growth: environmental change, social inequalities, geopolitical tensions, don't need to talk about that now with the US, and digital. So my guidance to business is you need to intentionally, again, a word that's going to keep coming up a lot, intentionally carve out time to step back and look at which of these mega trends have been accelerated for you and your particular business, your stakeholders, and to look at where you need to adapt. It is key to workforce culture. Purpose is right centre to culture. We know all of the research studies around engagement and how it drives engagement. Innovation, 30% uplift in innovation for companies that are purpose driven. And in terms of getting demand and just pure financial success over this period, purpose also is driving consumer behaviour. So there's a lot of strong data about switching at the moment. Whichever sector you're in, your clients or customers are switching brands at a higher rate than they were under the old world. So that presents an opportunity for purpose-driven businesses that can really, with integrity, get their voice out there. Just a word of caution on that research, though, because it's quite a sweeping statement to make about people switching to purpose brands. The very, very recent data that's come out, I think it was Accenture, is that switching is primarily around availability. They're still switching about 13-14% to purpose-driven brands. So clearly, if you can combine the two, you've got to get your supply chain sorted out to be able to deliver and be current. So that's me really saying that exactly what Natasha, Sarah, Louise, you've been saying is purpose is the new norm. It's what's going to get us through the storm. But so what? Okay, that's important to know. You know, we need a point of view on it as a business, but pragmatically, how do we unpick that? And the 3 steps that I'm advising leaders to take is, first of all, you've got to develop your own pathway through this, your own strategic leadership pathway. Louise, I think you've got a resource hub that you've got up for people, and on that there's a blueprint I put on there that people can look at afterwards. In essence, I think there's 3 stages. You need to do a review. So you need to step back. Which of these mega trends are most relevant to you now? Your stakeholders, who are they? You're always going to be thinking of your employees as HR professionals, but your employees now are looking at their communities, are looking into the supply chain. So your stakeholders are changing as well. Who are they? What are their new expectations? So there's a bit of a review to be done. And then there's that reimagination, that second piece, which is the exciting piece that people can get really engaged around. And we can look at what our new priorities need to be and the new capabilities, the leadership capabilities. If you are leaning into environmental social governance, for example, what are the new leadership capabilities around sustainability? There's a big debate out. Does everybody need a sustainability officer now to sit on the board or to be anointed? There's a counter view that actually it's such a core competence. You need to tackle it through education, learning, development, and raise the overall level of awareness on that rather than appoint an individual. It's a little bit sort of outsourcing it. So some key leadership capability questions, mindsets, behaviours. And then the third is the realignment point. So having looked at what's changed for you and what your new priorities need to be, looking at your business units and where is their alignment, misalignment, and the working patterns, agility, pace. And I would encourage people, don't do big strategic reviews, do short exercises like this, have much more of a design test review approach, a bit more of an iterative loop, not this large scale strategic planning. And then the final thing I would say is capture your lessons learned. I'd be interested if people could put into the chat room how many of you as leadership teams have carved out dedicated time to say, right, what have we learned through this last 6 to 8 months? What mindsets and behaviours do we want to take forward? How well have we lived our values? How many people have actually done that dedicated exercise? That is the role of leadership, is to stand above the fray and all of the operational challenges, to look at your strategy and look at your lessons learned.
Thank you, that's really interesting. And actually we've just had one comment, Julia, so far, which I'll then come on to the questions. Could you please just repeat the 4 megatrends, please? Absolutely. One of our attendees has asked.
Absolutely. So environmental change, that was very present pre the pandemic. Social inequalities, which have been brought to the fore, particularly by Black Lives Matter, but also with a big gender lens, social mobility. Geopolitical, so really, is there a global economy? The received wisdom, my view is it's gone regional now. Obviously, we've got the big US debate, that is the big market, China. So geopolitical is the third one, and then the fourth is the digital, virtual nature of business.
Thank you.
And depending on your business, those factors will apply in different weights.
Yeah, thank you. And we've already had some questions through, which is fantastic. So I'm just going to open up now to the questions from our attendees. So the first one is, how are new starters integrated into a company if they are forced to work at home? How do they understand the culture of the organisation if they never physically meet people? Do you think organisations will lose their culture the more new employees they have? So I think this does resonate, actually. I think there has been a general concern about how you help with the induction process where you've got people working remotely. So how do you really involve them in the organisation? So Natasha, do you want to comment on that one first?
Sure. I mean, once again, back to the word intentional. I mean, you have to work hard at it. So there isn't all of that sort of osmosis that goes on by just somebody being immersed in a team environment. So structuring, I mean, I would always encourage you to structure an onboarding process anyway. You want so you've got somebody excited during the recruitment process. That's that sort of time where you're selling the company, they're selling themselves, it's energizing, they're really pleased that they've got this new job, and then they hit the organization. And you want to keep those energy levels up. So how do you keep those energy levels up? Well, it's about continuing the connection, continuing the conversation. So I would say the first thing to do is expose them to as many people in the organisation as possible, so that they are hearing and seeing and experiencing the culture that you have. Because, I mean, cultures aren't just being lost because we're working at home, but they are requiring us to pay more attention to who we are and how we are, to do more of it in an intentional way. So that's the first thing. I think secondly, you need to make sure that the time that is put aside for the manager and the new starter, that there's plenty of it, so that those conversations are dynamic, they're happening regularly. And also, where I see things working most effectively is where managers are setting sort of clear objectives right from the very start, so they don't need to micromanage by giving, you know, things on a task by task basis, but they're saying, right, in the first few weeks, in the first however set amount of time, this is what I'd really like you to achieve. Part of that may be the onboarding process, which is meeting as many people as possible, going to team meetings, you know, being exposed to what's going on in the environment. And then regular check-ins between the manager and employee to make sure that they've got what they want, that they know what's happening, and that they feel okay. But I think also, you know, creating opportunities for social time. So, you know, we can still socialize online. It's not as easy, it's slightly more complicated. You've got to be quite creative. But how do you create those opportunities for the team to meet and not talk about work, so that the individuals see another side to the company, so they see the culture, because the culture really is all about how we behave together in a group. So get groups of people together and expose them to that, so that they can see that. But I guess the other thing is, tell them about the culture. Be really intentional to explain what your culture is, why you do what you do, what the purpose is. You know, try and engage them and connect them emotionally to what's going on from the outset. And I mean, I would want, you know, a senior team member to do that, to bring that to life, but also there's plenty of other people in the team that can do that too. So I guess they're probably the four things that I'd make sure that you focused on.
Fantastic. And then this is a question for you, I think, Sarah. It says, don't you think it's short-sighted to close offices? There will still need to be interaction between colleagues, i.e. work from office days and team meetings in person.
Short answer, yes, I think it's very short-sighted just to close an office. However, downsizing and really thinking about how much office space you need, not so much. I mean, even before COVID, we'd often do workplace surveys, and you'd find between 40 and 60% of the space was sat empty. So you'd have empty desks, you'd have empty spaces, never enough meeting rooms and never enough collaboration space. We, like 9 times out of 10, the findings that you'd have. So I think it's about actually, again, the word intentional. What is it you need the office for, and designing it and the behaviours around it for very intentionally to create space, because a lot of offices were really designed for different kinds of work than the work that we do now. And as I said, you know, having rows and rows and rows of desks where everyone's just completely focused and, you know, responding to their emails individually is not the best use of space. And, you know, spending millions of pounds of budget on property that's essentially going to be laying empty is probably not the best use. And actually, if that money could be diverted into a better employee experience, either at home or in the office. I think the other watchword for me is, you know, I suppose I picked up on the previous question, actually, in the word if people are forced to work from home. And I know in COVID times we do have to work from home, but there's a real fear, I think, coming through of people being forced to work from home in sort of the new normal, as the current catchphrase is. And I think, you know, when designing your new way of working, you will have to be really attentive to the fact that for some people, they will want to come in 5 days a week. They will want to work a 9 to 5. That totally suits their lifestyle, and that's what they would want. And you will have other people that will want to pop into the office once or twice a month. And it's about then designing a way of working with enough cohesion through it, And we talk a lot about rhythms and rituals, into bouncing off of Natasha's question, like how do you keep culture together? So to allow for kind of both ends of the extremes and for people to still feel like a coherent unit. So yeah, you need to do the maths before closing offices, but you know, even pre-COVID, we were finding acres of empty space of expensive empty space that could perhaps be better utilised.
Yeah. And there was just a comment on your point, Natasha, that about onboarding. There has been a suggestion that you could possibly have a mentor as part of a company mentoring scheme, which sounds a really good idea.
Yeah, so or a buddy. I don't
Yeah.
know the word, but you know, somebody who sort of looks out for you, like you got when you started school.
Yes. Yeah. And we've also had a question, which I'm just going to summarize because it's quite long, but it's really about trust. To say, you know, that there still does seem to be a concern with some managers that they're not trusting their employees to work productively from home. So how is that dealt with, really? Is there a broader question of culture and working from home when there is these trust issues?
Is that the comment that Adam's made, Louise?
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, I'm happy to speak to that initially. I just made some notes about it. Firstly, Adam, I'm sorry that you're experiencing that. And I think these are the sorts of things that we really do need to fix in organisations, because nobody should be made to feel the way that Adam's currently feeling. So that's
exactly.
So there's a few different things, and I'm not necessarily saying this is going to fix your problem, because depending on your culture and depending on your manager, this may be a systemic problem. However, there is hope. So I think the first thing that HR should be doing and leaders should be doing is to get feedback from staff on their experience of working in the workplace, working from home. I think you need to know how people are feeling in order to respond to it. You've got to make this personal. So I think that's the first thing that I would hope that your organisation is doing, is seeking that input. Secondly, you know, your comments spoke to bias and spoke to unconscious bias, and the way that some people, we all have unconscious bias, but the way that is experienced in the workplace can be very, very difficult for people. So managers and the wider workforce should understand that. They should understand how unconscious bias shows up. And I do quite a lot of work around this. There's a very important connection between high performance and feeling safe in the workplace, and bias, and actually what gets in the way of that happening. So there's a very important study that was done by Google called Project Aristotle, where they looked at 180 of their highest performing teams to understand what the attributes of a high performing team were. And all of the things that they thought might have played out, like intellect or even diversity of the group, weren't the most important things. But the things that were important was what they referred to as conversational turn taking. So it was the extent to which everybody in the group got the same amount of airtime. And the second thing was average social sensitivity, which basically means paying attention to how people are feeling. So unless you know people, unless managers understand the people in their team, unless they give them the opportunity to speak up safely, create that psychologically safe environment, then they're not going to get high performance. So I think any training and awareness building you can do around unconscious biases, which are very, very natural, normal and primal in us as humans, I think is important. But I think often where I see there being a breakdown is because managers and leaders aren't connected to people. They don't know them, they don't see them, they don't understand their human lived experience of the workplace, of being at home. They just don't know what is going on. So creating more opportunities for managers, leaders, and the wider workforce to come together and talk about that stuff is so important. I think it really, really helps to raise awareness of what's really going on for people, and understanding the impact of people's personal circumstances on their work is absolutely crucial for managers and leaders to manage performance. So, but the other thing I would say, Adam, and I'm sure you've already tried to do this, and I'm really sorry if this is a difficult situation for you, but often we limit ourselves by not feeling we can speak up about these things. But actually, often we can. So if we go to our manager and say, this is something that's happening for me, it's really difficult, and actually I don't want it to impact my work. So how can you help me? That will sometimes lead to a meaningful conversation and some meaningful change. So don't limit yourself by not feeling as though you can have an honest conversation. If you've already had that conversation and it hasn't gone anywhere, Adam, I'm sorry.
And can I also just thank Adam for raising this? I think it's absolutely crucial, and what you're highlighting to all the leaders on this call, so the impact that you're able to make is really broad, is the importance of challenging our assumptions about what it means to work at home. We all have our own experience of that, and there are fundamentally different situations for people. So as leaders, we have to challenge our assumptions and really understand the people in our organizations. And secondly, have some form of protocols around the rules of engagement for communications. And Natasha, you've just given some great examples from the Google study around time to speak, around when calls are happening. You know, if people have got family members who are around because they're living in more of a family setting, it's very difficult if it's at meal times or if it's at certain times of the day. So it's challenged the assumptions as all of us as leaders on this call. You know, there is a world widely different from our own. And secondly, to make sure we really push for rules of engagement around communications on virtual. The final thing I would say is it's not up to the BAME community. This is a leadership issue. And I am with you, Natasha, on the importance of Adam feeling he can raise this, but it's all of our jobs to resolve these fundamental inequalities through the workforce that are getting played out.
Thank you. And I'm just going to finish up now with just one final comment before we go back to our question. So it says one of the main issues for new people are to do with building trust with their new colleagues, and particularly when they aren't aware of the existing dynamics and hidden issues taking place. The ability to pick up on the tensions and read people is so much more difficult. So it's again about building trust. So yeah, just wanted to add that comment before we so I'm going to come back to questions from the attendees later on at the end of the session and see how many more we can answer. So if businesses do wish to focus on their workplace culture, I mean, one way of doing this is to create a culture deck and embed that within the organisation. Natasha, could you explain what a culture deck is, whether you think creating one's a good idea, and what your recommendations are for how you would go about embedding the manifesto once you've created your culture deck?
Yeah, so I mean, for those of you who aren't familiar with culture decks, they're a way of establishing either what the culture is or what you want it to be, in order to agree, I guess, a way of working or a set of standards or some very clear behaviours around the way that people will work and support each other in the workplace. So that's sort of an overview of what a culture deck is. I think it's so important, especially now, to open up the conversation around the sort of culture that we want as people in the organisations that we're working in. And, you know, traditionally, often the vision and the values and any sort of manifesto may have been created either at the top or by a small group of people who then tried to sort of do it to the organisation, and then we all had to try and adapt to that. And I mean, I'm not saying that didn't work, because when that's done very, very well, and when you bring vision and values to life in groups and through discussion and through various systems, processes and ways of working, it can work. What I've seen work even better is getting people in the workforce involved in this conversation. So opening up the conversation about what do we need to support ourselves at work, what do we need to deliver, and therefore what do we need to enable us to deliver that, and how can we support each other to work in a way that's going to meet our needs, but also meet the needs of whomever you're serving. So, you know, the shareholders, any stakeholders, clients, customers, wider communities. And I think that when you involve the wider workforce, I'm not necessarily saying everybody, because, you know, depending on how big it is, that can be massive, but the wider workforce in those conversations, it allows them to shape a culture that they are proud of. It means that because they're part of the conversation, they're more likely to commit to it. And it also means that it's more likely to be relevant to them. So, I mean, I use a tool called the Emotional Culture Deck, which is such a rudimentary tool, really. It's a deck of cards. I should have brought it. It's a deck of cards split into black and white cards. And there's the feelings that you want to feel at work, and there's the feelings that you don't want to feel at work, but sometimes do. And through having conversations in teams about those things, because ultimately, even though feelings aren't traditionally seen as something that we talk about a lot at work, they actually are at the root of absolutely everything that we experience at work. The days where we feel amazing are predicated by how we feel, and the days that, you know, are awful are predicated by how we feel. So unless we understand that, and unless we become conscious ourselves about what makes us feel great at work and also what doesn't, because most of us aren't conscious of that, we're just doing it, then, you know, we don't really know what's going to serve us. So this card deck is an amazing way of creating new conversations. And interestingly, there's been no setting that I've gone into to have that conversation where people have balked at the idea of talking about their feelings, because there's a card that says, you know, I want to feel inspired, and there's a card that says, I don't want to feel insecure. That's language we're all familiar with. And actually, when you look at those cards, you can say, okay, well, what does inspire me on a day-to-day basis at work? Okay, well, that's interesting. It gives you an opportunity for reflection. What makes me feel insecure? Well, actually, I feel insecure when I don't get feedback on this piece of work, or when I'm criticized for doing this other thing, or where I'm left out of this group. Those are very, very powerful conversations to have. And off the back of those conversations, you can create a manifesto that everybody can commit to about how they want to work together. So I think these things are fantastic, because I'm a huge advocate for getting people to co-create the answers that lead to a better culture in which they can perform. Ultimately, we all have to perform at work. That's why we're there. We are expected to do a good job. But there's certain things that we need in order to do that. So through co-creating a manifesto, it means that we give what we're supposed to give, and we get what we need in order to give it. So yeah, I'm a big fan.
Great, I'm going to have to look at that culture deck now. I have to find it.
Actually, on if you look at Jeremy Dean was the inventor behind it, New Zealand.
Yeah.
And he's actually got the culture deck for free if you look up Emotional Culture Deck on his website. So you can actually download it, cut all the little cards out if you want to, and test it out. I mean, you can then order the boxes, or you could get a facilitator like me to run something, but you can do it yourself. So, you know, this is an amazing guy who said, I just want to really help to change things, and look, you can do it yourself, and here's some instructions to use it. So get on the site and have a look and have a play around with it.
Fantastic. Thank you. Top tip there.
Yeah.
And Julie, you've mentioned the importance of having a purposeful business and how important this is for how an organisation conducts its business. What are your recommendations for how a business can translate its words into action?
Key question. And I think let's think of purpose here as, ideally, you're looking at the whole enterprise of the organisation, but it may be that you're not able to influence that right now. Maybe you're with a business unit, or you've got a team. So I think take the lens that you want to take, whether it's at an enterprise, business unit or team, around purpose, and be asking, what is our purpose now in terms of the business? How has that changed? So just think of that lens. And I think there's four sort of pragmatic things you can do. First of all, revisit it, challenge your assumptions. The world has changed around you. Make sure that for your team, however big or small that is, they're clear on what your team, business unit, organization's purpose is. Look at these trends, look at these, the culture deck is fantastic, look at what it means for engagement. So do a little bit of work about just asking those questions. It's highly engaging to revisit your purpose, first of all. Secondly, purpose is put into effect through good governance. And so I anticipate, particularly as HR professionals, a real area that you're going to see a lot of interest, an important role for you is in corporate governance, stakeholder governance. So it's really key to look at your own governance. And in essence, that is how you make decisions. So again, whether it's enterprise, business unit, team, be thinking about the tone from the top. I don't want to keep leaning back to Adam, but I think it's fantastic he raised that. So the tone from the top on the issues you're raising is absolutely key. What is the composition of that leadership team that is blind to this? So governance questions around tone from the top, the composition of the leadership team, the capabilities they have, and how voices are being heard. A really neat example from a business that have made a real change to get employee voices at the boardroom is Capita. You may or may not be aware, but relatively recently, Capita appointed 2 employee directors. Now, they're not employee representatives, so they're not shop stewards who sort of gather all the woes and then just pile them into the board. They are fully paid up. They have salary in addition to their day job. They are full non-exec directors of the Capita board, two employees who have been appointed to that. That's just one way. But the governance is really key, and that involves comp, benefits. Are they aligned to the behaviours that we want to see? The third thing is to act, to put your money and your budget where your purpose is directing you. At the enterprise level, we're seeing this with businesses looking at their supply chains. Patagonia is a great one that you're probably familiar with. It's a very environmentally friendly manufacturer of sort of sporting goods. They did a massive shift in their supply chain away from cotton to organic cotton. So divest from unsustainable products, unsustainable elements of your supply chain, invest in the new skills. A topical question at the moment on living your purpose and tangibly acting on it is furlough money. Lots of boards now have got the question, do we return the furlough money before we start paying dividends again? Now, that's a big macro question, but you will face these issues at your business unit or your team, and they will cause tensions, but have the conversation. And then the fourth thing I would say is have some metrics around purpose and what that means to you at the different levels, and be thinking of the metrics beyond the pure financial side, and you'll see environmental, social governance, ESG coming in much, much more strongly, and you're probably getting some of that cascaded through the organisation. So think about how you're going to know whether you are successfully living your purpose. What indicators would tell you that over the next 6 to 9 to 12 months?
Thank you. So we're just going to open up now to our final part of the talks, which is questions from the audience. So if you've got any final questions you want to ask our panelists, then please put them in the Q&A box before we finish the session. So I'm just going to come to one of the questions now, which is, well, first of all, it's a comment to say that for this business, that working remotely has helped to remove barriers between their offices in different locations. And they say, do you have any suggestions about how to maintain that when some people are back in the office and others are still at home?
Yeah, I think I'm sure, Natasha, you'll have some points on this as well. I think it is interesting. I've seen it work both ways. I think it's not an unusual story to hear that remote working has actually been really great for some people, because there are more voices at the table than perhaps there were. Some people, because you've got a chat function, because you know, often you know, Zoom or Skype calls have to be facilitated to ensure that everyone gets a turn just by the nature of the technology, which means there's some space for actually people to say things where previously in real life they might not have felt able to do that. So I think there is we're getting quite a lot of that information through as well. The hybrid question around how do you do it when you'll have some people in an office and some people at home is a really big one, and technology is going to be the big enabler here, as well as behaviors and etiquette. So I think again, it's about, if you're going to meet, designing the meeting or designing the intervention, knowing that you are going to have half in one and half in another, and making that part of it. And it's interesting that the likes of Zoom and Teams and things are starting to think about how that works. You know, we're noticing that old school meeting rooms with a big screen, it's actually not that helpful, because people around a table will want to have the conversation here, and occasionally they'll look up at the screen and there'll be like little faces there. So sort of it's almost like having the circle of many laptops with a face on each, so that it feels like you know, everyone is literally around the table. There's some really interesting ideas coming out. I don't have the answer yet, because it's literally emerging now as people are grappling with this problem. But I suspect that sort of in the next 6 months, we'll be seeing some really interesting technology that's going to help to solve that problem. But I think, again, it's about being really conscious of going, there will be this hybrid thing, and actually there should be a seamless proposition where it won't matter whether you came in or whether you're at home. Your interaction and your engagement is equal. So yeah, I think watch this space. I'm sorry I don't have the direct answer yet.
I think that's really useful, Sarah, and I think also there's not many things that would change in a business where a team of people, or at least a couple of people, wouldn't sit down and talk about what needed to change in order to support that. Yet we have things changing around us all the time as people, and we don't necessarily apply the same thinking. We just think that we're going to adapt to it and we'll just start behaving differently. But of course that doesn't necessarily happen. And in those hybrid situations already, we're starting to hear people saying it's not working. You know, where there's people in the office and there's people at home, it's just not working. The meetings aren't effective. The people at home aren't being listened to. So we have to learn new skills. The people who are chairing meetings will need to facilitate it in a different way in order to bring those people into the group. We'll have to agree as teams how we're going to make sure those conversations are productive for both the people at home and the people in the office, or in wherever they are. And we're going to have to then test it, see if it works, review it, and change it if it doesn't. So like any change, we have to manage this change, and we have to talk about it and figure out what's going to work best, rather than just turning up, doing it and hoping it works, and complaining by the water cooler that we can't talk by about the fact that it was a rubbish meeting. We need to actually talk about how we're going to make these things work. And there's research coming out now. I literally read it this morning, and I can't remember who published it, but basically talking about the fact that organisations don't believe they have the skills that they need to adapt to the way that we are now going to have to work in the modern age. So it's going to have to become part of L&D strategies, operational strategies. How do we develop the skills that we need to work in this new hybrid world?
Yeah, I think that there's some really good tips there, because it is about ensuring you've got, you know, whether you're working from home or working remotely, that you've got the same experience as employees. And Walorna's just commented that, you know, because of all these changes, that there are lots of new roles and training requirements. So, for example, she's been asked to run training on how to host events. So I think it is, as you said, Natasha, it's leaders looking at, you know, hosting, you know, events in different ways, and it's revisiting, isn't it, to check that, you know, that it's working, or whether any changes need to be made. So another question that we have is, how would you suggest engaging the workforce in a culture survey and actioning its outcomes if most are working from home? The cards idea sounds great, but perhaps not ideal for working remotely, is the comment.
Yes, fair point. So the cards you can actually do online, once again. So facilitation skills I would say we probably all now need them. You know, anybody who's managing or leading a team or runs meetings, you know, we sort of need to get our head around the fact that facilitating productive meetings is part of the skill set we have to develop. You can run that online, but if you don't want to, and if you want to do something else, you know, there's tons of surveys out there that can help you to understand what's going on in the workforce. Actually, I was going to say this later, but we're beta testing a product that we've developed called the Conscious Culture Diagnostic at the moment, which is built around 5 aspects of what leads to performance and well-being in the workplace. We're not charging people for it. So if there's anybody who wants to test that as part of our beta test, get in touch with me and we can have a chat about how we could do that. But basically, it's about asking people how they feel, what they need to do good work. And also, so as part of our diagnostic, we ask about vision, culture, values, the extent to which they're embedded. You know, you might not have a problem. You know, you might not have a problem around culture and behavior. You might have more of a problem around processes and systems. So diagnosing the problem first is very, very important. And also another thing that I would always encourage organisations to do is have employee-led working groups who are empowered to do something about any of the findings that come out of surveys. I don't think that these things should just be owned by HR or just be owned by leaders. And I do believe there's energy in the workforce to make change happen if you give them the direction and the empowerment to deliver that. I work with some amazing employee groups who are doing much more impressive things and much more interesting and much more engaging things than I ever did when I was leading HR, because they're on the front line. They know what will make them feel better. So give them a role in making it happen.
I totally agree with the facilitation skills. I think that's something that we're having to learn by default if you didn't have them before. I mean, we've we've had to put our whole business online and pivot, and we found, just on a very practical level, there's some free tools out there, free whiteboards like Mural or Miro that you can cut and paste images on, and it works beautifully in terms of you don't have a physical card, but you can cut and paste them and virtually move them around and have those conversations. There's tons of templates on there as well, so I think there are a lot of tools out there if you go searching for them and connect in.
Thank you. And there's a question for you, Julia. Do you have any recommendations around how broadly purpose is defined? Should it be a short phrase or a fleshed out policy?
So the key is it needs to be clearly understood and relevant. So that does need to be shorter. But what I would say, it's more important that it's lived in practice and it's actioned and the behaviours follow it. So what I'm a little bit worried about at the moment is, because there is such a focus on purpose and people sort of instinctively know it's important and they look at the data, I'm a little bit worried. And I had a conversation yesterday with a marketing team who said to me, they're trying to pick between, A and B phrase, and it was a handful of them sort of in a little huddle picking a certain phrase, and that's missing the point. Purpose is, what do you stand for? What are you about? So it goes into culture. So it does need to be a short phrase, but how you get to it needs to be built on your sort of inherent integrity, your inherent values, and also the future looking aspects of it. So short, but full of integrity. And what's more important, and you'll hear this phrase license to operate coming out a lot more, is that you live it in practice. There is so much more social media scrutiny, investor scrutiny, all the washings, greenwashing, whatever washing. So it's keep it short, but ensure that it's developed through the conversation with people. And that there are tangible actions that can demonstrate its integrity.
Thank you. And I think there's just one final question, which is that this business has conducted health and safety assessments remotely. but they worry about staff who don't want to cause a problem, despite them having problems from working from home, as well as those employees who expect a whole new home office suite. So do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, so the staff that don't want to cause a problem, I think it is just almost speaking directly to that and going, I think the reality is the first few months of lockdown, it was just everyone just frantic, like, scrabbling to work out just how to make it work. I think with a longer term view, you need to make sure that you're comfortable, that your physical and your mental health is going to be protected, and so if you're hunched over on a high bench, that's not going to work, and there needs to be the kind of conversation directly say, and it could be just as simple as going, thanks to those of you who have come back. For those of you that don't want to cause a fuss, I want to hear from you as well to find out a bit more about this, that, and just encouraging that conversation. I think people have, understandably, with furlough and people being laid off, not wanting to cause a fuss is coming up quite a lot, because there's a lot of fear in terms of, job security and things like that. So it's just speaking directly to it. The employees who want to have whole new offices, really interesting. I think it's Germany that are battling with this at the moment, in terms of if we are now saying you are going to be working from home, do we have an obligation therefore to provide you with all of the equipment and stuff that's needed? In Britain, we seem to be looking more around what might be the employee proposition going forward. So I think there's kind of short-term COVID, how do we cope? And then there's the longer term, if we are moving generally in the direction of there will be more home working, we are going to release potentially some property, we're not expecting everybody in, then actually there's a genuine business strategy required, like conversation to be had about, well, how do we equip people to do this safely and appropriately, and what does that mean? And certainly we're dealing with one organisation at the moment that, especially for part of their senior package, they are looking at equipping them with a shepherd's hut in a garden, or a mini corner office in your home, for want of a better description, or the budget to create that. So I think these are the conversations that will be coming through the year, and we're going to need to get our heads around. There's no right way of doing it at the moment, but certainly food for thought.
Yeah, there's also a duty of care, of course. I mean, musculoskeletal issues are the highest claim through any sort of medical insurance provision. So, and we have noticed that people are compromising their own health through working in a way that doesn't support them physically at work. Now, if employers aren't supporting that and investing in what they need to do that, well, that's remiss. So there is a duty of care to get that sorted.
I think culturally as well, we've probably all experienced, the back-to-back Zoom meetings. There are behaviours as well that, organisations could look to be encouraging. So whether that is creating 50-minute meetings with a whole, you should be getting up for those last 10 minutes and going, making yourself a drink and at least moving your body, or creating the ability to work standing up. You don't have to buy everyone a sit-stand desk, but you can buy the desktop things that kind of allow those things to happen. There are kind of solutions out there, and a lot of it is encouraging the right behaviours as well. So that we know, interestingly, in our own organisation, we just recently had some feedback. Our junior staff were sort of almost feeling is it okay to go and have a walk for half an hour? Well, of course you should be, why weren't you? And I think it is, we need to repeat these messages over and over and over, because a lot of us are in flight or fright at the moment, and are not necessarily hearing some of the messages, even if organisations communicating them. So I think there's an internal comms aspect to this as well that's really important.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, Natasha, someone's commented that they would love to hear about your survey, Natasha. So just to let you know, Natasha's contact details are on our workforce hub, as well as our other panelists as well. So you can get in touch with her direct about the survey. So I think if we just take time now just to wrap up, I think if I just come to each of you to perhaps ask you what would be your recommendations, kind of the key takeaway that businesses should be thinking about for the next 6 months? Shall I come to you first, Natasha?
I'm the only one that's not on mute, so I shouldn't put myself.
Yeah, that's why I went to you.
Okay, so I want to reiterate what I said to begin with about connection. So make sure you're being intentional about connection in the organisation, and help your managers. You know, there's so many managers out there who are going to be struggling so much with this. We've even seen where, you know, where managers weren't micromanagers before, they've become micromanagers in this environment because they don't really know how to manage without seeing people and being around them. So help them to understand how to manage without the need to be sort of myopic about things. And when I talk later, I will talk a little bit more about that. I think the whole, we are all learning, all of us, even the experts. We've not experienced this before. This is so new. So, you know, do something, learn from it. And if it's not working, change it, and then do it again and learn from it. You know, the whole, you know, fail fast mentality and learning from mistakes, growth mindset, Carol Dweck, you know, we're always on a learning journey. And if it's not working, it's only because we're not yet there. So get into that mentality, you know, and just iterate and build and change it and learn from each other. We're not doing it wrong. We just haven't learned how to do it the right way yet. So I guess they'd be my two takeaways.
Fantastic. Julia, come to you next.
So I would say 3 things. First of all, intentionally carve out time to think about whether it's your purpose, your strategy, or culture. You're all under so much pressure operationally. It's going to take, you know, you to carve out that time. So carve out that time. Use whatever framework works. You've heard of a lot of them here. There's a number on the hub. It almost doesn't matter so much what framework you use, but to just step back, take stock, review, resort your priorities. So that's the first point. Secondly, I think really discuss as your team what your rules of engagement are around communication, around motivation, about what is required from your team to really collaborate and work well. So develop those in whatever way fits for your business. And then the third thing, which picks up the sort of unconscious bias assumptions, is ask ourselves, what are our pitfalls? Okay, so if we've looked at a little bit at our strategy, our purpose, our sort of raison d'etre, we've looked at what works and what we need to do. The third thing is, what do we need to be mindful of? What are the pitfalls? What are the old habits we want to not fall back into? What are some of the issues, some of the implications around the social side? And by that, I mean diversity, inclusion, that we need to be mindful of and guard against.
Thank you. Over to you, Sarah.
Yeah, I think for me, I'd say be engagement, and huge amounts of curiosity, because this, you know, it's an amazing time to learn about what was and is working for your organization in terms of how people are working, what they need around them to work well, what kinds of spaces, what kind of equipment, what kind of connection. So I think this is a really interesting time when all those social norms are broken, to ask the really great questions of, okay, well, we've not got a blank sheet, but actually we've got some tremendous opportunity to design a way of working that could be really different and more beneficial. So I'd say definitely be curious and engage. For, you know, your facilities and your property people are your potential secret new best friend. And if you can start having conversations with them so that you're coming at this together, you know, they can help you solve some of your trickier problems if you're kind of in this together. And I think one thing we're really witnessing is the sort of the blurring of boundaries around this stuff. And I'd say be really proactive in that space. So, okay, what is the workplace strategy, or the you know, what's kind of going on, and is it meeting the needs? Is it doing what we need it to do? Our space is a key enabler of this organisation, as are its people. We need to make sure that they're dovetailed and connected to the strategy kind of going forward. And I think lastly, just really exactly like this, keep going in the conversations. Things are evolving, you know, monthly, and new ideas are kind of coming out. We're hosting a roundtable ourselves next month, the beginning of December. If anyone's interested in coming to be part of that conversation, we'd really welcome you. And I think it's just take the time, as Julie and Natasha both described, to have the conversations and to give yourself a chance to think. We are witnessing as well some organisations that are sticking their fingers in their ears, and they just keep talking about when it goes back to usual. And I think what's becoming increasingly obvious is that's very unlikely to happen, and those organisations are likely to be really struggling if they're not part of these sort of the evolution of the workplace going forward.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much to our panelists today. That was a really, really engaging and interesting discussion. So thank you so much. And thank you for all of the questions as well from the audience today.